folks, or good afternoon or evening, depending on where you are. Thank you for joining us today for the latest in our GeoTalks Express series. As you can hopefully see on this slide, we are going to be talking about training today. We're going to give you a little preview of what's involved in our Global Mapper training program. Obviously, under our current circumstances, we are having to deliver training in a new way. We were just talking yesterday about what our plans had been for this year. We were going to be taking trips to Australia. We were going to be taking, sending someone over to the Netherlands. Folks were going to be going to different parts of the US and Canada to deliver in-person classroom-based training classes. And obviously, with what's happened this year, that has not been possible. So we've had to refocus how we deliver this content. We have done a couple of our training classes. We've learned a little bit about the process, learned about what works, and we've just announced a couple of new sessions. So we thought we'd give everyone an opportunity to see what exactly is involved in this process, how we deliver training. I'm joined today by my colleague, Mackenzie Mills. Good morning, Mackenzie. How are you this morning?
Good morning, David. I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. I'm ready to go. Mackenzie has joined our training team recently. She would be one of the folks on our staff who would deliver training. So I thought I'd invite Mackenzie along to kind of simulate, again, using this online platform, what we do in training. We're going to be hearing from Mackenzie a little bit later as we kind of tag team a little bit on going through a typical training scenario. This transition to online training has positives and negatives, obviously. From my personal point of view as a trainer, the obvious negative is we don't get that direct visual interaction. Any of you who have been through any training class will know that being in a classroom, seeing the instructor seeing the attendees, there's a communication that goes on there you just cannot simulate or cannot recreate in an online situation. So that is something I miss desperately. I'm yearning to get back into the classroom again to do this on in-person classes. But there are benefits as well. Obviously, convenience is one, and geographic reach is another. We are able to offer training now to a global audience, and we are finding folks that are signing up for training in time zones that are not very friendly for where they live. We've had folks signing up for training from New Zealand who will adapt their time to East Coast US time just to attend our training. So it does expand geographically, and for that reason we thought we would use this opportunity to show our audience, to show you folks what's involved, and to give you some information about what is involved in training. So let's quickly take a look at what we're going to be doing. Obviously, we need to go through a few housekeeping issues first. Many of you have been to our sessions before. Those of you who haven't, this webinar format is listen only. You can hear me, you will be able to hear Mackenzie, but unfortunately we can't hear you. However, there is the opportunity for you to ask questions of us, either about how we deliver training, some of the logistical considerations with training, or indeed about some of the workflows that we're actually going to show you. Feel free to use that questions panel. Either myself or Mackenzie will try to answer those questions, either verbally or if it's more appropriate, we'll answer you directly. And we will also follow up with any questions that need to be answered kind of in a more long form process after our session ends. And this would simulate what we do in training as well. This interaction, this ability to answer questions and to make sure that we are still communicating. This simulates exactly what we do in our online training. So questions panel over there on the right side. I know some of you have found it already and been asking some questions. So please feel free to use that one during our session today. This session is being recorded. If you missed something or want to recap or want to share this with some of your colleagues, maybe some of your colleagues are interested in attending training, by all means, feel free to save the link that you will be sent. Probably one of the questions that will be asked, Mackenzie and I were just talking about this before the session. People often ask, is it being recorded? Yes, it will be recorded, and you'll get an email probably within the next day, before the end of the week, with a link to the recording. And again, feel free to share that with some of your folks. So just a few other housekeeping issues before we get started. This is a very kind of coincidental time right now, because we are in the throes of a release. Coincidentally, it just happened this way with our schedule. As of today, we're going to be releasing a new version of Global Mapper. I think today's session is going to be the last time we'll actually show version 21.1, because version 22 is going to be coming out by the end of the business day today. If you subscribe to our communication, you'll get an email with a link so you can download the latest build and even try it out if you just want to see some of the new tools that are in there. Next session, next GeoTalks Express session, will cover the content that's new in version 22 of Global Mapper. We're going to follow right after that, 2 weeks after, the middle of October, with a look at what's new in the Lidar module. We've already been playing with some of those tools. I know, Mackenzie, you've probably been doing some of the testing and initial evaluation. Some of the tools are really cool. Very, very eye-opening and striking new functionality that we're adding. Obviously with Lidar in the 3D environment and some of our 3D rendering is very, very cool stuff. So I encourage you to take a look at those new functions by registering for those 2 webinars. Going to the end of October, we're going to shift our focus a little bit to look at some of our geodetic tools, specifically GeoCalc Online, which is our online geodetic registry. We'll probably be inviting some of the folks from the geographic calculator side of the shop to come and share a little bit about that with you. And again, that's our session towards the end of October. And as with all of these sessions, if you do need more information, the URL is here at the bottom of the screen. I'll also put that at in the description if you're watching the recording. You can register for any of these events, and it's free of charge, obviously, for you to attend. So, for today, again, when we were outlining the kind of our plans for this, we thought we would just approach this session as a simulation of training, give you an hour-long kind of snapshot of what training involves. Before we get into that, and we will be doing a little bit of hands-on activity to illustrate that process a little bit later, but before we get into that, we'll talk about some of the logistics of training. What is our method? What's our philosophy in terms of training? And this is a process that has evolved over years, delivering training, getting feedback from users, what works, what doesn't work, what works in terms of time, in terms of the content. We'll talk a little bit about that method that has evolved and has been very successful for us, both, again, in classroom and in our current situation online. We will then give you an overview of our curriculum. What do we cover in training? What's involved? We'll go down a bullet list quite literally and show you the contents of what would be delivered in our Global Mapper training class, not only for Global Mapper, but also for the Lidar module. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. We'll also introduce our training materials. What do you get? When you sign up, when you are ready for your training class, what do we give you? What does training involve? And we'll show you what materials we give you. We give you a veritable plethora of training materials that you can play with during the class, and you can obviously use these as a follow-up as well to initiate your own training. Again, as I mentioned, to simulate the process, we will go through some what we call sample training workflows. We're going to take specific sections of our training curriculum. I'm going to hand over to Mackenzie at this stage, and she's going to guide us through what we would cover in that section. Basically going through the individual workflows. We will talk a little bit about the calendar. We have some scheduled training classes coming up. One is in a couple of weeks. There are still some spaces available. If what we show you today is of interest, we'll encourage you to go to the website and register for this class. And we also want to make sure we cover the subject of custom training. I would say most of the training that I'm doing now is specific to individual clients. When I say clients, I mean companies or organizations that have particular requirements, and we can customize our training and deliver it to your company, to your organization, to your colleagues in a way that's more appropriate for you specifically than perhaps you would see in the public classes. So I'll remind you about this a little bit later. If it's something that is of interest, I'll give you some contact information. You can get in touch. Typically what we do is we send you information about what we can offer. You will tell us what's most relevant, and we'll kind of come up with a curriculum that's designed to meet your needs specifically. So that is the plan of attack. Again, my first bullet there, teaching method. We're just going to go through a few PowerPoint slides here, just by way of introduction, just to kind of get a feel for what is involved in training before we actually do some hands-on work here. The important thing to note here, while online training tends to be a little more challenging in terms of participation, we do want to emphasize that our training is hands-on. We give you the opportunity, both through providing data and additional training materials, which we'll show you in just a few minutes, to actually participate. And we very often will ask for feedback, ask for follow-up comments about some of the workflows, maybe adapting some of the settings to see what the differences are. So it is a hands-on session. Now, the challenge in that context is literally real estate on your screen. We do encourage folks who attend training to have a couple of monitors at least. 3 is ideal if you have the wherewithal. Having one monitor with Global Mapper running that you're playing with, having another monitor to display the contents of the trainer screen, which is basically like sitting in a classroom looking at the projected image up on the front, and then maybe even a third screen for some supplementary materials, perhaps the training handout. So not everyone has that luxury, but if you do, that's an ideal setup for training. But it is hands-on, it is workflow-based as well. We've designed our training curriculum so it actually matches what you're likely to do with the software. Rather than just going button by button by button, describing what it does and showing you the consequences of clicking this button, we actually build it around real world scenarios. And they follow a lot of different themes. They're not specific, obviously, to a particular industry, but they follow a lot of different themes. And very often we'll take the data that we create in one simulation and then use that a little bit later for another simulation. I think Mackenzie's actually going to show us an example of that in one of our example workflows. So it is real. We're trying to make this as real as possible in terms of how we deliver this content. Obviously, it's instructor-led. One of the benefits of having online training, and obviously the logistical simplicity of being able to gather in a virtual meeting space, is we can bring in multiple people. Our online training has multiple instructors. Mackenzie and I have done training together. A couple of my colleagues, Jeff Hatzel, Katrina Schweikert, you may have seen them delivering some of our webinars. They're our trainers as well. And we'll have 2 people at least giving training. So you will always have someone there to answer questions, to do some direct interaction, as well as a little bit of tag teaming so you don't listen to one monotonous voice for the entire sessions. Our duration, by the way, I didn't put this bullet up, but it's also worth noting. We like to constrain the time frame for our training sessions to 2 hours, 3 at the most. It does depend on individual schedules. We find that most people's attention can reach 2 hours, but beyond 2 hours, you start to drag a little bit, both as an instructor and as an attendee. So those 2-hour sessions, we segment up, we spread them over a couple of weeks, giving you an opportunity to obviously to take a little bit of a break before we begin the next session. So it is instructor-led. We do have real-time instructors. It's not self-driven. It is interactive. As we are seeing with our class today, or not class, I should say, but our simulation, we have opportunities for communication. And depending on the size of the class, that can be either through text interaction, or if it's a small class, especially if it's a custom class, we can open it up for audio communication as well. So it sometimes can get a little chaotic, but useful information is shared when we can actually chat back and forth. That's typically something we'll offer in a custom class for a limited audience. But the ability for us to hear from our attendees is very, very important in terms of how we deliver our classes. And it's flexible as well. While we have a prescribed outline of content that we want to make sure we follow, we also adapt based on questions and based on need. We run it on the fly very often. If a particular line of question comes up about a function, we will go with that and we will explore that and we'll look at some of the settings that pertain to the question that came in. So while we have an outline that we want to follow, we have a little bit of flexibility built in there as well. So that kind of is a high-level overview of how we teach, what our philosophy is. Anything I'm missing here, Mackenzie? I know you've participated. Anything that you would like to add to this bulleted list that I may be forgetting? Or share your experience a little bit, maybe?
I don't have anything to add to that list right off the top of my head, but we do really encourage folks to ask questions, whether they're questions on the workflows that we're demonstrating or, slightly tangential questions in the training. We do like to really use that flexibility and explore as much of the software as we can in the time that we have.
Absolutely, and you've been key in that process, because doing it as an individual is so more challenging, but having that second person, whether it's Mackenzie or Katrina or Jeff, it really makes that possible. It makes that possible. I should also mention here, one bullet, I just remembered one other thing. Our training is structured, obviously. We begin at a certain time frame, we end our session, final session, we wrap up, we say our goodbyes, we go our separate ways. Training does not end there. couple of things. You do have the materials we provide for you. Those don't go away. We will provide you with a license to the software as well, a temporary license. I usually like to extend that by a couple of weeks so that after training, you can go back and revisit some of the workflows, and we'll take a look at those, as I've mentioned, in a few minutes. But you can go back and look at those workflows, maybe adapting them for your applications, maybe changing some of the settings. So that training is continual. You don't stop training at the end of our final session. And if you have questions during that time frame, we encourage you to get in touch with us, to ask us. I often regret this, but I give my personal contact information to everyone I train, and I get emails. You know, in the couple of weeks that follow, I'm spending a lot of my time following up on specific questions, and that is something we offer. We want to make sure that by investing in our training, you're getting what you need in terms of content. So again, that's just a little overview of what you to expect if you sign up for our training class. Let's take a look at, we're going to start by looking at the Global Mapper class specifically, the Global Mapper class outline. What would be involved in Global Mapper class? Now, when I say begin with Global Mapper, you're probably thinking, well, it's all about Global Mapper. Yes, you're right. We do have a separate class for the Lidar module. We made this decision several years ago that the Lidar content is a little more advanced. Obviously, it's more specific. Not everyone who uses Global Mapper uses the Lidar module, so we just segmented that section up. It is essentially a standalone class. Folks who have been using Global Mapper for a while and are competent in the core capabilities of the software can go straight to the Lidar class and get that content that's more relevant for what they do. But for folks who are new to Global Mapper, we do encourage you to sign up for this class, and we'll go through in a minute a few bullets here that outline what exactly we cover, what would be involved in this class. Before I do that, I'm going to, from off screen, if I can rearrange my windows just a little bit here, I'm going to bring into view a window that shows what I'm talking slowly to try to catch up with myself here, what we deliver to you in terms of content. Now this, if you sign up for our training class, a few weeks before the class, we'll send you a link with all of the important information. We'll give you a license to Global Mapper. If you don't have one already, we'll show you where you can download it. We'll give you some information maybe for a little bit of initial self-training that get you up to speed if you're completely new to the software. We also send you a link to what you're seeing on my screen. This is a folder that we send you, a zipped folder that we send you, which is the basis of how we deliver our training. And this goes back to the previous slide where I said it's completely interactive and hands-on, because this, I'm going to show you very quickly, this is where we drive all of our training scenarios. Let me show you first of all the handout itself. Again, with apologies from off screen, I'm just going to drag this into view here. This is, if I expand it slightly, Adobe Acrobat, this is our training handout. Now, obviously, again, if we had the luxury of being able to meet in a classroom, we would bring a printed copy of this for you to have on your table. Not possible with our online delivery, but we do provide you with this PDF. You can print it, and folks do. Folks still like to have that smell of paper on their desk. This gives you an overview of the content of our class. I'm quickly scrolling through here, and gives you, based on the workflows that we follow, step-by-step instructions with screenshots and settings, all of which lead to a very specific end product. Our training is structured in this way, that when you follow a workflow, we will all end up with the same result. And in order to do that, we provide you pre-configured data that actually does what we expect it to do. This wasn't always the case. We used to deliver training in a more free-form way, where the content was kind of delivered on the fly. But now it's all structured, and as you can see, just quickly going through some of these examples, very specific instructions, step-by-step, settings that are required, etc., etc., etc. So this is, again, just a quick look at what you will be given. This is yours to keep, obviously. This training handout is not something we deliver to the public. This is yours as a training registrant, and you have this for your using as you need going forward. The data itself, this is obviously what drives the class. There's a number of folders in here, and at the beginning of my classes, I spend a little bit of time describing what we have here. We're all over the world, quite literally. We're in Brazil, we're in Minnesota, we're in Maine. We're delivering these training scenarios based on different data sets and different geographic locations. To make this more relevant and to make it more streamlined, we've configured all of our scenarios based on Global Mapper workspaces. Now, if you don't know what a Global Mapper workspace is, that's fine, because by way of introducing the software, we talk about a Global Mapper workspace. Why should you pay attention to this format? Why is it important in the context of using Global Mapper? But as we get comfortable with this format and using this data format, we can then drive additional scenarios by loading these files. I'm going to go off script slightly here, and I'm going to actually load an example. Let's take an example of a workflow. And again, this would be something that will be reflected in our handout. I'm just going to drag and drop this on my screen. Here we have some point data. Again, the process of training on this specific function just requires you to load a pre-configured file. And this particular example, as indicated by the title of the workspace, is called density map. We would go through a simulation of how to create a heat map or a density map describing in detail the procedure, the settings, the consequences of the settings, etc., etc., etc. I'm not going to go any further with this because Mackenzie's going to do a simulation of an actual workflow in a little bit, but that essentially would simulate how we begin the process. Now, it's quite likely during our training classes that some of you may have issues. Maybe somebody knocks on the door, you have to leave the class for a minute, or a bathroom break, or maybe your internet goes down. It's happened before, and you miss a certain section. And we have had people, oh, I missed that last 5 minutes. Can you tell me how do I get to the end result? Never fear. Obviously, the instructions are there. You can follow them, but also we provide a complete list of the completed workspaces for every scenario. So we show you the before, you go through the workflow yourself and see the after, but if you miss it, or if you want to do a comparison between what you generated and what you should have generated, this folder that we provide you shows you the end result of every scenario. So I'm going to grab the one called density map. I'm going to drag that one. If I had missed the steps, here I've created a density map. Well, I didn't really. I cheated. You can't cheat in the class, by the way. You can load the completed versions and pretend you completed the workflow. Not really a good thing to do, but you can do that. So again, this is a quick example of the data and how that data works. So I'll unload this file. I'm not going to save any of my changes here, obviously. The final folder here, by the way, that you may have noticed in what we deliver is called My Maps. Let me one level up. My Maps is just an empty folder that we provide for all of the data we generate, for all of the workspaces we create, for the files we export, etc. And there are many of those during our sessions where we generate data. I provide this My Maps folder simply as a single location to archive all that exported data. So that's just a quick overview of what to expect in terms of what's delivered to you. Let's go back to my slide presentation. I'm very quickly going to go through the actual course content. We begin obviously with an introduction to Global Mapper. I've had some folks in training, Mackenzie, I don't know if you've encountered this as well, of people who have literally never seen Global Mapper until the day they sit in training. So those are the folks who are actually easiest to train. Limited expectations if you come in with no knowledge. But we begin addressing the very new users. And I find that even though this is intended for novice users, folks who have been using the software for a while will pick up some relevant information during this introduction, kind of cleaning up some bad habits. So we begin things like navigating around the interface, setting up your own settings, maybe your units of measure, configuring the layout so it meets what your needs are. So kind of the basic getting started. We then begin our formal session by talking about how to get data in, access to data, loading files, accessing data online. I think this is actually a simulation that Mackenzie's going to show us in a couple of minutes here, getting data into the application. We talk about the digitizer. An entire session is dedicated to working with vector data, drawing, editing vector features. Most people using Global Mapper are doing this at some level, working with shapefiles, working with CAD files. And again, we show you some functions in there that you may not already be familiar with. We talk about attribute management, the idea of managing information, and related to that, we talk about thematic mapping. We go through a series of processes where we define the attribute characteristics of features and then display them. We go through simulations of generating thematic representations of your data. We then shift to looking at raster data. We look at things like image rectification or image or raster calculation, some more advanced tools. We're getting into looking at some of those analysis procedures now, but shifting away from our vector focus, looking at raster data and everything around working with raster data. This is for many people the most important part of our class, and certainly it's the longest. Working with terrain data, from the basics, creating a terrain surface, generating a model. We use some Lidar for this. We don't focus a lot on Lidar during this class, but we bring in a point cloud, generate a surface, and from that we do things like contouring, doing watershed analysis, view shed analysis, all of those terrain analysis procedures. This is by far the most, I would say, popular, most useful for a lot of our users is our terrain analysis class. We also bring in a supplementary section working with 3D data, specifically vector 3D data. And with us, we're increasingly looking at things like 3D meshes, working with variations on 3D data. We talk about applying a z-value to vector features as well. Now, this is another useful one that there's not a lot of initial enthusiasm about. When I send out my initial survey, sometimes people say, well, I'm not really interested in this tool. But when we introduce what's available in terms of workflow optimization, there is a lot of positive comments. Specifically, what we look at here is scripting. And a lot of people, when they approach scripting, get a little bit kind of overwhelmed and kind of glazed over. I'm never going to understand this. I'm not a programmer. We introduced the idea of building scripts and creating scripts to automate a lot of the procedures that would have preceded it. And folks leave at the end of the class being able to create global mapper scripts and kind of building on that in their own world to simplify their interaction with global mapper, to streamline it. So we want to make sure we introduce that in our class as well. We get into map design. The idea of assigning labels, printing the map, designing the layout, geospatial PDF generation, etc. We're getting to the point where we're taking all of the work we've done in the application and presenting it. And as a final bullet here, we obviously talk about exporting as well. We begin with getting data in, we have a lot of fun in the middle, and we end with getting data out. And that is the basic structure of our global mapper class. Those are the bullets that we would cover. Now, I've talked long enough. To show this in action, I want to kind of tap Mackenzie on the shoulder, as I do during our training classes as well when I need a break. Hey, Mackenzie, would you like to show us an example going through an actual workflow, maybe from the access to data section?
Yeah, I would love to. I'll give you a break from talking, David.
Perfect. My water bottle is here. I think I need to lubricate my vocal cords. Okay, I'm going to shift our presentation. And hopefully Mackenzie is going to be grabbing the screen.
All right. So I have my screen shared here and open. I have a blank instance of Global Mapper and the PDF training manual. And we're going to be going through an actual exercise that is part of this training manual here. Again, this is from the access to data section of the training. So up near the top of the list there. And for this workflow, the goal is going to be to load some data from a text file, just importing some data. But before we actually go and load our text file, we're going to do a little prep work to our installation of Global Mapper. And that is going to be creating a custom point symbol and point style. So the data that we're going to be loading is point features for fire hydrants. And so we want to create a custom point style that is a fire hydrant icon. So we have the steps outlined here, and we'll begin in an empty Global Mapper workspace. And we'll open the configuration dialog and start looking around in our custom symbols section. So I'll jump over to the application, and we can open configuration from the wrench up here or the configuration text from an empty workspace. And down the side, we will go to Styles, Custom Symbols. So here you can see that there are some custom symbols preloaded into Global Mapper. They are all oil and gas symbols, I believe. But we have this button to add a custom symbol of your own. So I click on that, and from the Global Mapper training folder, under Data, Holly Data, Hydrants, we have the hydrant icon. And in the actual training class, you guys will absolutely have all of this data, the hydrant icon file here, and the PDF handout to follow along and complete these workflows on your own. So this would be guiding you to where that data is kept. So we're going to go ahead and select our hydrant icon to open and use for a custom point symbol. We're just going to name it hydrant, and we'll click OK. And we can see that that has been added to our list here. So we have a custom point symbol. This can be set as a point style for some point features we load, but we're going to take it to another step here and go to our point styles tab in configuration and create a custom point style where the default symbol is going to be our fire hydrant symbol. So again, I can reference back to this PDF here, and in the configuration dialog box, we're going to the point styles tab, and we're going to add a new point style and set the hydrant icon as the symbol for it. So we'll click to add a new type, name it hydrant, and then set the default symbol. So you can scroll through this menu, or you can hit the H key to jump to the H section, and we'll select our hydrant symbol here and click OK to add that point type to our global mapper installation. I will click OK to save those configuration settings. And at this point, we've completed this first little section of our workflow here. So now we are going to move into actually loading our hydrant point data. To do this, our step 10 here is to load a workspace from our training data folder. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Click Open Data Files. And from the data folder, load the hydrants workspace. And I think I saved over my workspace previously, so I'm going to backtrack a moment here. This is the default workspace that you should see with that training installation. We've got some high resolution imagery for Holly, Minnesota, I believe. And we have a vector layer with just a town boundary. So we're going to go ahead and load our point data. We will open our data file. This is going to be in the Holly data folder under hydrants, and we have a text file here. Now, when loading a text file, since a text format is variable, it's not a specific format each time. Text files can be easily edited. It is a good idea to take a look at your text file and know a little bit about it. So I'm going to go ahead and open this text file in a text editor here, just so we can take a look at the content of this file.
Sorry to interrupt you, Mackenzie. This is a very, very appropriate workflow that you're following, because this workflow is actually changing in version 22. Not significantly changing, but the need for you to do what you're doing now is going to be gone, because in version 22, little sneak peek, not everybody knows this is obviously unreleased, but we'll have a preview actually within the import dialog box, so you can bypass this initial preview. You can actually see that in the dialog box. So a little plug for next, the next Geotalks Express session. Come to that one, you'll find out all the new stuff in version 22. Sorry for interrupting.
No, that's a great little plug for 22 there. You will be able to see a preview of some of these entries, so you won't need to look at this in a text editor before loading the data. But just looking at this, we see that we have our headers in the first line of our file. We've got latitude and longitude as our first two attributes, latitude listed first, and then we've got some other attributes relevant to our fire hydrant points. So with that information, go ahead and close this. I will select my hydrants text file and click to open it. And since text file formats are so variable and can follow a lot of different format specifications, we get this generic text file import options. And you'll get this if you're loading a text file, a .txt, a CSV file, an XYZ file, or any of those common text formats. So first here, we have our import type. We are looking to load point features only, so we'll select that top option. We know that our latitude coordinate is listed first in our text file. We don't need to skip any fields at the start of our line because our first two attributes in each line are latitude, then longitude. Our text file is a tab delimited file. We have some built-in delimiters you can select here, or you can choose to auto-detect, and Global Mapper does a pretty good job of automatically detecting whatever delimiter is in your text file. So if you are not sure, auto-detect is a good option to try. But we know that this file is tab delimited. And here is where we can set the point style for our features that we're loading. And since we created a hydrant point style here, I can select that hydrant feature type. We will want to load the attributes from our file. And as we saw when we looked at the text file, we have our column headers in the first row of our file. And we don't have any elevation for these hydrants, so we can uncheck this box for elevation. I can just quickly go back to the PDF here, and you can see that we have the instructions for how to load this specific text file. We have them outlined in text here, and then a screenshot of the options as well, so that during training you can follow along. If we move a little too fast, or you have, you leave a checkbox unchecked, you can always go back and reference these options here if needed. So we go ahead, click OK, and we're prompted to select a projection for our text file. Text files don't have any projection information written into them like some other formats, so Global Mapper asks you what projection to use when loading this file. Now we know this is latitude, longitude, and we have here step 14 to select our projection as geographic with the datum WGS84. So I will go ahead and do that. Find our geographic latitude, longitude, WGS84. Click OK, and our data loads. Now you can see that our custom point style is being used. We've accomplished our goal here. We've loaded our hydrant point features using our custom point style. And we can zoom in a little bit and see that those are placed at our hydrant locations. So at this point in this workflow, we have come to the end. Our last instruction is to save the workspace. You'd likely save this to the My Maps folder as to not overwrite the built-in workspace in case you want to go back and perform this exercise again from the start. And we also have a note here that if you get different results, you misselected your projection, you're having trouble having the text file load, we do have a completed version of the workspace for you to reference if you need that in that completed workspaces folder. So continuing on, as David mentioned, we do like to use a data set through multiple workflows, stringing a few different tools together to perform a larger workflow. So this hydrants data set, we actually see a couple more times in this Global Mapper training. So I'm going to scroll down a few pages here past, we're going to enter the digitizing and vector editing exercises.
Oh, well, while you're scrolling there, just to keep us up to date, there's a couple of questions that came in. Someone asked about during training if it's possible to share screenshots. That's a good question, something that we've looked at as a possibility. Definitely with two instructors, there's direct engagement with somebody who's not actually doing the instruction. Because of the way we segment the classes up, because they're a nice 2-hour blocks, we very often find people will follow up after the fact with direct email, and gives us an opportunity to address any specific issues directly offline. So we're not taking up our valuable classroom time to addressing one person's very specific issue. That would be a little bit of a kind of a time lag. So we do encourage that interaction, like offline interaction, and the fact that we break our classes up gives us that opportunity between our sessions. Other question came in about language. Obviously, the classes that we deliver, Blue Marble delivers are going to be in English. And we do deliver these obviously to a wide audience, whoever wants to sign from whenever in the world. But we also have training delivered by our partners. Many of our resellers and partners have actually gone through a certification process to become trainers themselves, and will deliver training in their language. So if you are interested in training in a non-English language, please contact us, and I'll give you contact at the end of the session today and find out if there's an opportunity that would be more appropriate. I know there's a session coming up in German. I don't know if I don't have my calendar in front of me, but I believe sometime before the end of the year there's going to be a session in German if you're interested in that. So again, keep those questions coming in today if you have any other questions about our session. Sorry, Mackenzie, back to you again.
No, those are some great points to mention, David. So continuing on, we've scrolled down a little bit to another section of our training manual here, and we're going to use the same hydrants data set and create some range rings around our hydrant features. So you can see for this workflow, the first step is to load the hydrants workspace that you worked on previously. I have that open here, and you can always use the completed workspace version as well. So the second step in this workflow is to select all of the hydrant features so we can create range rings. I will zoom back to my data extents, and we can select in a few different ways in Global Mapper, all with the digitizer tool. You can click on individual hydrant features. Holding control will allow you to select multiple. You can click and drag to select multiple, or use this poly select tool. But the most efficient way to select all of the features in a layer would be to right-click on the layer over here in the control center and simply choose to select. And that selects all of these hydrant features. So to create our range rings, we are going to choose our Create Range Rings tool from one of our more advanced digitizer toolbars. And we get this little pop-up question asking us if we want to create range rings centered on our selected points, which we do, or you can choose no from this dialog and click at a specific location to use for your the center of your range ring. We are going to choose yes to create a range ring set for each of our hydrant points here. And we have our range ring and ellipse setup dialog. So I'll reference back to the manual. We have the settings for this tool outlined in text and a screenshot to make sure that we're all, setting consistent settings. Although in training, feel free to alter these settings a little bit as you feel, or, you do have this data to go back and look at this workflow again and, alter those settings to create some different style range rings. But for this workflow, we're following the handout. We're going to create 3 range rings here. We're going to use a radius of 50 meters. You can change the unit for the radius here. That's good to note. So you can work in a specific unit if needed. We also have the option to get a range ring or get the radius from an attribute. So if you wanted to create range rings variable based on an attribute value, say some fire hydrants have a higher capacity and could reach 75 meters. Maybe you have an attribute defining the reach, and you could use an attribute for your range rings. And we will also change the range ring area style. By default, it's just going to create a no fill area feature with a black outline, but we are going to change this to a solid fill with a red color, and we're going to make the transparency about 50%. This will allow us to see where those range rings overlap a little bit better. The color will darken where we have overlap. We're also going to remove that black border by setting the style to null so that we don't have that harsh border around our features. And we'll disable labels for these range rings as well. With these options set, I can confirm that they do look correct, and we click OK to create our range ring features. So we can see, looking at the overview here, that we do have decent fire hydrant coverage for the center, more populated area of the town. We can zoom into some specific areas to see, this corner a little bit lacking in fire hydrant coverage. Maybe that'd be a candidate to place a new hydrant in this area, or maybe down this road, if there's a water line that you could tap into, place a hydrant out here, just to increase that coverage and that fire safety. And so you can see, if we zoom into a fire hydrant in a little bit more space here, that we have 3 rings as we set for each fire hydrant feature. The first one at 50 meters, the second one at 100, and the third at 150. And those areas of overlap, you can see the color darkens a little bit, becomes a little bit more opaque, to show where we have higher coverage in these areas. And that would bring us to the end of this workflow, where we would again save the workspace, and we do have the completed workspace noted as well.
Yeah, and very often in this type of situation, you maybe save as, you keep the original workspace and save a version. So you end up your session with several dozen workspaces that are basically versions of the workflows that you've created. Thank you, Mackenzie. That was exactly, I've worked with Mackenzie in training, and that was exactly how we approach training. One other question came in that's worth noting. I just answered it privately, but I'll answer it verbally to everyone. Someone asked about a copy of the training manual, getting a little sneak peek of what we deliver. The training manual is only going to be available for folks who sign up for training. We don't make that available publicly. So if you're interested in kind of getting more detail on what Mackenzie was showing us there, that is going to require you to sign up for the training class. So thank you, Mackenzie. How are we for time? About 1/4 the hour. Let's take a quick look at, well, actually, before I go to the Lidar classes, one other thing I want to mention here. Over and above the structured workflows that are outlined in the handout, that we will follow in tandem, basically, you will follow along, etc. We throw in a few tips and tricks, time dependent, things that are not documented or not written. And we get very often the feedback that these are sometimes some of those popular parts of our class, those little extra pieces. I'm going to show you an example of one of those very quickly here. I'm going to bring up a fresh instance of Global Mapper, and I'm actually going to load up a workspace that I had recently. Now, this is not in a handout. This is not something you'll see documented. It's just an extra little piece of information. This is a series of points. These points represent ocean current sample locations. I'm not going to spend the time going into the detail. In the class, I would, but these points have a U component and a V component, basically magnitude along the x-axis and magnitude along the y-axis, which we can use to derive a direction of aggregate magnitude and a level of magnitude. In other words, how fast are the currents flowing and in which direction based on these two variables. Now, with this as the raw material, we can create what's called a quiver plot. We introduce this idea of data visualization, which is a quiver plot. This is a very simple process. I'm just going to double click on the layer to bring up the options. And again, folks can play along with this. There's nothing written, but they have the workspace and they can certainly play along with the procedure as I'm going through it. Under point styles, we generate a quiver plot. We can define what the symbology will be. Oops, sorry, try again. This is going to be a scaled vector representation of each point. And you can define what that scale value is. It's going to be a 1 scale by default, but it will increase in size to indicate, again, the magnitude in the prescribed direction. We define the U component, which is U component, the V component. You can also do this, by the way, with simple direction and magnitude attributes. Probably a common use of this might be for wind direction and wind speed. The wind is blowing in this direction at this speed. You can create a similar visualization using this quiver plot process. Quickly, we'd go through this. We click OK, and now you can see the results. So that's a little extra workflow, not part of a broader kind of part of our curriculum, but just a little bit of an extra kind of tip and trick, something you may not have known the Global Mapper is capable of doing. And I have, I think, 3 pages worth of tips and tricks that we should have an entire session of tips and tricks. I think, Mackenzie, that would probably be a good idea, and into one of our 2-hour blocks. But let's get back to our schedule. We've got about 10 minutes left here. Transitioning from Global Mapper, our Global Mapper class is a standalone. You do not have to go to the Lidar class if you don't want to, if you don't use Lidar. Similarly, if you're comfortable using Global Mapper, you've been using it for a while, you can go straight to taking the Lidar class to work with some of the new tools we've added in the Lidar module. I would encourage folks who are new to Global Mapper not to jump into the Lidar module class, because we do not spend the time to cover those basic components, the navigation on the interface, configuration, etc., using the digitizer. We go straight into working with Lidar. And for this class, again, quickly going through the bullets here, we talk about the structure and characteristics of Lidar. What is Lidar? We also talk about other point cloud formats as well. In fact, one of the first workflows we go through, and we provide you with the data for this as well, is using our pixels to points tool. We'll give you some drone images, and we're going to use this data repeatedly throughout the Lidar module session, where we're going to take our drone images, generate a point cloud, identify ground points within that point cloud, generate a DEM, generate a DTM. I think we even generate some contours from that DTM, but we provide you with those basic raw materials for following these procedures, for following these workflows. We talk about point cloud visualization in this class. How do we change the appearance of our point clouds to reflect a certain characteristic of the data, maybe the elevation, or maybe an RGB, or as noted here in this screenshot over on the right side, something that reflects the point type. We've got ground points and unclassified, and if you note here, we also have power lines. This is a workflow we go through as well to identify utility cables in a point cloud. So visualization is one of the options. Profile visualization, looking at your point cloud from a lateral perspective as opposed to top down. We also obviously look at the 3D view of our point cloud as well. Filtering. We get into actually improving the quality of Lidar or point cloud data by doing some filtering or some editing. A lot of folks are using Global Mapper for this data cleanup procedure, removing noise points, constraining the point cloud geographically. These are options that we will show you during this process. We will talk about some of the automatic reclassification tools. Like I mentioned, identification of ground points. Very important, obviously, if you're doing any work with terrain analysis, to know that the points that you're using for the generation of your surface actually are ground. And we have an algorithm that actually looks at a point cloud and goes through that process. Again, providing the relevant sample data. We'll talk about the extraction process. Once we've cleaned up our attribute data, once we've our point cloud data, we've assigned the appropriate classifications, we'll go through a few exercises where we actually extract features, buildings, trees, utility lines, as you'll see here, as vector features. We kind of overlap a little bit with the Global Mapper class in that we do address the idea of working with terrain data again, because obviously it's relevant for folks working with point cloud data. Working with the terrain analysis functionality is relevant in this context as well. And I've got about 5 minutes, I think, to show a quick demonstration of one of these workflows in just a second. A quick look at something that's unique to the Lidar module, but still works with terrain. Again, terrain analysis, volume calculation functions that we talk about, and again, exporting, mirroring what we do with our standard Global Mapper class. We begin with the basics of introducing the characteristics of Lidar and getting the data into the software, and we end by talking about how to get data out, how to export Lidar data or point cloud data in whatever format is needed. So again, a quick overview of the structure of that class. I'm not going to go into the details here. Let me have lost some of my floating windows on my second monitor, but this is the same basic structure we provide in terms of the data, in terms of the My Maps folder. I'm actually halfway through a session, so My Maps actually has some maps in it. We've already started a multi-day training class with a particular customer, so I'm actually using this data in real time. Got a session this afternoon. And we have a handout as well. I'm not going to open it right now, but it's the same structure that Mackenzie was using before. Very quickly here, to demonstrate an example of a workflow from the Lidar module class. This particular example is related to hydro flattening. And if I actually was to go through all of the steps in the handout, this would take quite a long time. So I'm just going to go through a very condensed version. Hydro flattening, for those who are not familiar with the concept, allows you to take vector features that have an elevation value, either a single elevation value, or if it's a line feature, a sequence of elevation values, and use those to override the elevation in your point cloud for the purpose of flattening a body of water. Now, if I turn off the point cloud in this example, you'll see I have a body of water here. If I ran through the process of generating a surface, it would create this textured surface to my water simply because I do have some points here. Now, some of these points are classified as water, but others are classified as ground. And those ground points, if they're retained, will create this implication of some sort of serration or kind of texture on the surface of the water. You may or may not want that. I would assume that most people would want water bodies to be flat. So what I'm going to show you right now is the process of hydroflattening. It's a very simple process. Again, to illustrate how we approach our training, we actually have the data already prepared. We have a polygon feature. This polygon feature has a single attribute. It has an elevation. It has a known absolute height above sea level of 25.9 meters. This is real data, by the way, from the National Hydrological Service. So we're going to use that to essentially burn the terrain in this area. I'm going to turn my point cloud on again. Apologies, I'm going through this much faster than I would do in training because I'm limited in my time today. But we're going to go through the process again of quickly creating a surface for a local area here. Our gridding tool is what we use. Again, we would typically spend the time to describe the various settings in here. I'm not going to take the time right now. The important settings I'm going to apply here are to limit the extent, or the processing to just my ground points, the ground points that are present in this point cloud. We saw a few of them when we previewed it a second ago. Also, and this is the function that's relevant, this is what we talk about in detail, this idea of using 3D area or line features as either break lines or as a method for hydroflattening with a soft edge distance. And this is basically your feathering. This will allow you to feather that elevation from the polygon into the surrounding terrain. Now, one more thing I'm going to set here in the interest of time today. I'm going to limit my analysis to the extent of my pond. We don't want to go any further than that for the purpose of our quick illustration today. We'll click OK. And just to prove the point that it worked as prescribed, we have this nice flat surface where you'll have to take my word for it. In the class, we would have actually done it before and after, but we can see hydroflattening having been used to override the elevations in our point cloud. With apologies, that was a little bit rushed, but just wanted to show you an example of a workflow from our Lidar class as well. Now, in the couple of minutes that remain, few other things to note here. How successful are we in training? How do we deliver? What's the feedback been? We do encourage feedback from users. We send out an evaluation form within a few days of the class because this is how we know that we're hitting the right marks. We're giving the content that people need. Is it working for you? Was this useful? I would say, Mackenzie, I'm not sure if you have any other input, but without exception, we get positive feedback. I'll just throw a few of the comments that I received from a recent class on the screen here. These are the types of feedback we get from our training class. Folks who go to Global Mapper training are able to go back to their place of work, to go back to their projects, and to use the software more effectively and more efficiently. And that's the bottom line. Ultimately, that's my objective when I deliver a training class, is if you are able to go back and make better value of the software, job done for me. And you can see based on some of our feedback, that is something that we achieve. If you have the endurance to suffer through the entire training curriculum, both the Global Mapper class and the Lidar class, we award you with recognition of a certificate. Now, I actually simulated a certificate for myself. I don't actually have one. I haven't actually earned a certificate, but I made one up for myself here. Mackenzie, do you have a certificate? Did you ever get certified as a Global Mapper user?
No, I never did.
Oh gosh, I'll have to rectify that. So this is what you will receive. If you attend the training class, show competency in your ability to work with Global Mapper. Not many people have this. This is a limited honor that we provide to people. You will be a certified Global Mapper user. You can put this on your wall, frame it, and put this on your LinkedIn profile if that's appropriate as well. So just wanted to make sure that you're aware of that before we wrap up. One final slide here before we send you on your way. If you're interested in what we covered today, if anything kind of tweaked your interest, There are a couple of classes that are coming up. One the week after next. We're going to be doing 8 to 11. That's a 3-hour block each day, a little bit longer than we usually do, but we want to give ourselves a little bit more of a time to cover all of the content. Monday to Friday, that's 8 a.m. here on the East Coast of the US. I should mention that as well. We do that early start, so folks in Europe, it will be an afternoon session for you. If you want to join us from points east, hopefully it's a little bit more user-friendly than an afternoon start. 8 to 11 for our Global Mapper class. We then jump to the end of November, start of December. We're doing an afternoon class for folks here in the US, maybe a little more user-friendly, certainly on the West Coast, 2 o'clock to 5 o'clock, doing a Global Mapper class again for the duration of that week, right after Thanksgiving, between the holidays here in the US. The Lidar module classes, the week after our first Global Mapper class. It's a 3-day class, 2.5 hours each day, totaling 7.5 hours on the Lidar module. 8 a.m. again, early start. To 10:30 a.m. and in the December timeframe, an afternoon session. So if you want more information on these sessions, more information on the curriculum, more information on the registration process, easiest way to get that information is bluemarblego.com/training. Which brings us conveniently to the top of the hour. Hopefully this gave you a little bit of a snapshot of what we do when we train on Global Mapper. And if it's something you think would be of value to you, either attending one of our public classes, or as I had a bullet in my introductory PowerPoint slide, if you want custom training, if what we have outlined in terms of the curriculum is maybe not matching how your company anticipates using Global Mapper, maybe you don't want to do a full 3-day course, you want to condense a little bit just to focus on your specific requirements, please contact us. We will certainly work with you on setting up that custom class, even working with custom data, your data, in that class. We would take a little bit of time to incorporate your workflows to make sure, again, based on the objective that we define for our public classes, that you're getting what you need to be most effective with the software. And that is that for today. Mackenzie, any final questions come in that we should address? I'm just looking down the list. I think we've answered pretty much all of them. If there's anything we didn't answer, we will follow up with you. You'll get an email from some folks in our tech group if you have any questions that were not answered. Thank you for those who asked the questions. As I said before, this is being recorded. Please look out for this recording. Within a couple of days, you'll get an email from us indicating that. Mackenzie, as I have to thank you during our actual training classes, let me thank you again today for helping me with the content delivery. I appreciate your taking your time, especially on a release day. I know you're busy.
Yeah, well, thank you, David. I do appreciate being here. It's fun to do these with you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And folks, thank you. And please sign up for the next session 2 weeks from today. We're going to tell you all about what's new in version 22 of Global Mapper. Have a great day, folks.